My cousin banished me to a dark basement at her own wedding, laughing that I didn't count. So, I took the deed to her new house, canceled the catering check, and let her ruthless mother-in-law face the furious, unpaid staff. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The heavy, steel-reinforced door clicked shut behind me, the finality of the sound echoing off the cold, cinder-block walls. I stood frozen on the bottom step of the stairwell, my breath catching in my throat, not from the sudden drop in temperature, but from the sheer, unadulterated shock of my reality. The air down here smelled of damp earth, industrial floor cleaner, and the metallic tang of old copper pipes. It was a stark, violent contrast to the intoxicating scent of thousands of imported white peonies and expensive champagne that permeated the grand ballroom just one floor above me. I pulled my silk shawl tighter around my shoulders, shivering uncontrollably. I was 42 years old, but in that specific moment, standing in the dim, flickering light of a single fluorescent bulb, I felt as small and helpless as a discarded child. My body was already failing me. I was barely 3 weeks out from a severe bout of pneumonia that had landed me in the hospital for days. My doctor had explicitly warned me against attending any large, exhausting events, but I had pushed myself. I had endured the breathing treatments, the sheer exhaustion, and the dizzy spells, all because this was Gabriella's wedding. Gabriella, my cousin, the girl I had practically raised since she was 10 years old. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away from watching her walk down the aisle. I looked down at the hem of my dress. It was a custom-tailored, deep emerald gown that I had purchased specifically for this occasion. The delicate silk pooled against the gritty, unfinished concrete floor, picking up a layer of gray dust. Across the room, nestled between a massive, humming HVAC unit and a stack of broken banquet chairs, sat my assigned place. It was a single, rusted metal folding chair pulled up to a scuffed plastic card table. There was no linen. There was no centerpiece. There wasn't even a napkin. Just a few minutes prior, I had approached the elegant reception desk upstairs, giving my name with a warm smile to the polished hostess. I had watched her manicured finger trace down the alphabetized list of VIPs, family members, and distinguished guests. I watched her brow furrow. I watched her check a secondary list and then a third before awkwardly waving over the wedding coordinator. The hushed whispers, the pitying glances. And then, the coordinator leading me away from the glowing chandeliers and the soft melody of the string quartet, guiding me through a pair of swinging service doors, past the bustling kitchen staff, and pointing me down this very stairwell. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the coordinator had mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. "The mother of the groom finalized the seating chart this morning. This is where you are placed." There was no place card for me upstairs. There was no seat at the family table. I had been systematically and intentionally erased from the celebration. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the erratic, terrified hammering of my own heart. The physical weakness from my recent illness flared up, making my knees tremble, but it was nothing compared to the emotional decimation tearing through my soul. I had given this girl my entire life, my youth, and my heart. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. I slowly walked over to the folding chair, my high heels clicking ominously against the concrete. I didn't sit down. I just stared at the empty, barren table, trying to make sense of the senseless. How had we gotten here? My mind flashed back to the encounter at the top of the stairs, right before the coordinator had escorted me into the shadows. I had been standing near the entrance of the ballroom, dizzy and confused, when Gabriella and her new mother-in-law, Beatrice, had appeared. Gabriella looked like an absolute vision. The bespoke lace gown she wore, a dress I had personally flown her to Paris to select, fit her flawlessly. Her hair was swept up in a cascade of elegant curls, and her eyes were bright with the thrill of the day. But when she saw me standing there with the coordinator, her expression shifted. The radiant joy melted into a mask of mild annoyance, mixed with a strange, detached embarrassment. "Gabriella," I had croaked, my voice hoarse. "They're telling me I don't have a seat in the hall. There must be a mistake with the caterers. Before my cousin could even open her mouth, Beatrice stepped forward. Beatrice was a woman who wore her insecurity like heavy perfume. She was draped in ostentatious, flashy jewelry and a gown that was entirely too loud, her face pulled tight into an expression of perpetual, haughty judgment. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the lingering paleness of my face from my illness, and then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smirk, sharp and victorious. "There's no mistake, Zoe," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The ballroom is at absolute capacity, and frankly, we had to prioritize. Only close family gets a table upstairs." Only close family. The words had struck me like a physical blow. I looked frantically at Gabriella, waiting for her to intervene, to laugh, to tell Beatrice she was being ridiculous. I had bought Gabriella her first bicycle. I had held her hand through her parents' funeral. I had paid her tuition, her rent, and dried her tears through every major heartbreak of her 24 years of life. But Gabriella didn't defend me. Instead, she averted her eyes, looking at her perfectly manicured nails. A small, nervous, and incredibly cruel giggle escaped her lips. "I mean, it's just a seating arrangement, Zoe. Don't make a scene. Beatrice has important guests here from the country club, I guess. I guess you just don't count for the main floor. You understand, right? Guess you don't count." The memory of her voice echoing those words made the basement spin around me. I reached out and gripped the edge of the plastic folding table to steady myself. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was a calculated, deliberate humiliation. Gabriella had sold my decades of devotion for the approval of a woman she had known for less than 2 years. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the damp air filling my recovering lungs. I reached into my beaded evening clutch. My fingers brushed past my lipstick and my car keys, settling on the thick, heavy manila envelope folded inside. I traced the edges of the thick paper within it. My sorrow was slowly, agonizingly beginning to crystallize into something much colder. They thought I was just a tired, older cousin they could shove into the shadows. They thought I was powerless and embarrassing. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the sheer magnitude of this insult, you have to understand the dynamic of the past year. By trade, I am an antique restorer and appraiser. It's a profession that involves a lot of dust, wood shavings, and long hours in a workshop wearing a heavy apron. What Gabriella and certainly Beatrice willfully ignored was that I wasn't just a hobbyist tinkering in a garage. I am the founder and sole owner of a highly lucrative, internationally recognized restoration and luxury appraisal firm. I handle estate liquidations for the ultra-wealthy. My dusty little job had paid for Gabriella's entire life, her private design school, and ultimately this 6-figure wedding. When Gabriella introduced me to Matteo, I was initially thrilled for her. Matteo was 26, a junior financial analyst, and perfectly pleasant, if a bit entirely spineless. The real problem was his mother, Beatrice. From the moment Beatrice strutted into my home for our first introductory dinner, she made her disdain for me painfully obvious. Beatrice was a 60-year-old self-proclaimed socialite and philanthropist. Though in the year I had known her, I had never seen her donate a dime or work a single day. She survived on alimony from a long-gone ex-husband and a mountain of credit card debt, desperately clinging to an illusion of high society grandeur. During that first dinner, Beatrice had looked around my comfortably furnished, albeit lived-in, home, wrinkling her nose. "So, you fix old chairs for a living?" she had asked, sipping the expensive wine I had poured her. "How? Quaint. I suppose it keeps you busy since you never managed to find a husband of your own." I had let the insult slide for Gabriella's sake. But as the wedding planning commenced, Beatrice's manipulations kicked into overdrive. She convinced Gabriella that my presence was a liability to their new, elevated social standing. Beatrice took over the planning, demanding imported flowers, a 5-star venue, and a Michelin-starred caterer, aggressively inflating the guest list with her own friends to show off. "We need to project the right image, Gabriella darling," Beatrice would purr during their planning sessions. We can't have people thinking Mateo is marrying down. Through it all, Beatrice never offered to pay for a single napkin. Instead, the invoices magically found their way to my inbox. I paid them. I paid every single one of them in full, directly to the vendors, keeping the transactions quiet so Gabriella wouldn't feel stressed on her big day. I let Beatrice take the credit in public, believing my silent financial support was the ultimate act of love for my cousin. I wanted Gabriella to have the fairy tale she had always dreamed of. I now realized that Beatrice hadn't just taken credit for my money. She had actively used it to build a wall between Gabriella and me. She had poisoned my cousin's mind, convincing her that I was a peasant to be hidden away so as not to ruin the aesthetic of their fake royalty. And Gabriella, desperate for the approval of her new, high-class family, had eagerly swallowed the poison. Standing in that freezing basement, the truth washed over me. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. To Beatrice, I was an ATM, and to Gabriella, I was an embarrassing secret to be buried beneath the floorboards of her perfect day. I remained perfectly still in the freezing, subterranean quiet, allowing the devastating reality of my situation to wash over me. The damp chill of the basement was nothing compared to the ice forming in my veins. My breathing, which had been ragged and shallow from the exertion and the lingering pneumonia, suddenly steadied. The tears that had pricked the corners of my eyes evaporated, replaced by a profound, razor-sharp clarity. I was not a victim. I was Zoe. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire from sawdust and salvaged wood. I had negotiated with ruthless estate liquidators and outsmarted seasoned auctioneers. I was not going to be discarded like a piece of broken furniture by a vain, empty woman and a spoiled, ungrateful girl. My fingers, trembling only slightly now, traced the heavy manila envelope tucked inside my beaded clutch. This envelope was the culmination of my life's work and my deepest love for my cousin. I pulled it out, the thick paper rasping loudly in the quiet stairwell. I untied the string closure and slid the contents into the palm of my hand. There were 2 items. The first was a certified bank check, crisp and watermarked. It was made out to the Grand Horizon Estate and Catering Co. for the sum of $48,500. This was the final, staggering installment for the reception happening directly above my head, the open bar, the imported caviar, the 5-course plated dinner, the towering cake. I had deliberately held off on submitting this final payment until the day of the wedding, intending to hand it personally to the venue manager as a quiet guarantee that Gabriella would not have a single financial worry on her perfect day. The second item was a stack of legal documents, bound by a heavy blue clip. It was a property deed. For the past 8 months, while Beatrice was busy agonizing over napkin rings and agonizing over the perceived lack of prestige in my background, I had been working every weekend. I had purchased a charming, 3-bedroom Tudor home in a beautiful, safe neighborhood with an excellent school district. I had used my own crew to completely gut and restore it. I had sanded the original hardwood floors on my hands and knees until they gleamed like glass. I had installed a custom chef's kitchen, knowing Mateo loved to cook. The house was fully paid off. No mortgage, free and clear. It was my wedding gift to them, a foundation for their new life, entirely debt-free. I stared at the deed. My name was currently on the title, with the transfer documents completely filled out, requiring only my final signature and a notary seal to legally hand $1 million asset over to Gabriella and Mateo. Guess you don't count, Gabriella's voice echoed in my mind again, but this time it didn't bring pain. It brought a ruthless, profound sense of liberation. I slid the deed back into the envelope. Then I took out my phone. The reception down here was terrible, only 1 bar of service, but it was enough. I bypassed my contacts and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a deep, familiar voice answered. Zoe, Marcus, my corporate attorney and one of my oldest friends, sounded alarmed. You sound like you're in a tunnel. Aren't you supposed to be sipping champagne and crying at toasts right now? How's the breathing? Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. I need you to do two things for me, and I need them done immediately. First, I need you to log into the corporate account and place an absolute, immediate stop payment on the certified check drawn yesterday for the Grand Horizon estate. There was a heavy pause on the line. Zoe, that's the venue. That's a nearly $50,000 check. If I stop that payment, the bank flags it instantly. The venue will know within the hour. I am fully aware of how the banking system works, Marcus. Cancel the check. Done, he said, the sound of his rapid typing echoing through the phone. Consider it stopped. What's the second thing? Do you remember 6 months ago, when Beatrice first started causing trouble, and you suggested we run a standard background and asset check on her? Just to know who we were dealing with. I remember, Marcus replied, his tone shifting into his professional, predatory lawyer mode. And I remember you telling me no, that it would be a violation of Gabriella's trust, and that we had to give the woman the benefit of the doubt. I was wrong, I stated flatly, staring at the concrete wall. I was incredibly, stupidly wrong. Run the check, Marcus, run a deep dive. Assets, liabilities, credit history, civil suits, everything. I want to know exactly how broke this woman is, and I want the PDF sent to my phone in the next 10 minutes. Pull every favor you have. Give me 8 minutes, Marcus promised, the protective anger evident in his voice. Are you okay, Zoe? Where are you? I'm in the basement, Marcus, I said, a dry, humorless smile touching my lips. But I'm about to go upstairs. I pushed open the heavy steel doors and ascended the stairwell, each step deliberate and measured. The transition from the damp gloom of the basement back into the opulent, sun-drenched foyer of the venue was blinding. The string quartet had transitioned into a lively, upbeat tempo, and the muffled roar of 200 wealthy guests laughing and clinking glasses washed over me. I smoothed the front of my emerald gown, adjusted my shawl to hide the slight tremor in my hands, and walked purposefully toward the grand entrance of the ballroom. I didn't have to look far. Standing near the towering, floral-draped welcome arch was the newlywed couple, flanked by Beatrice. They were posing for a professional photographer, trying out various angles for the perfect, magazine-ready shot. Matteo looked handsome but slightly overwhelmed, constantly adjusting his bow tie. Gabriella looked flawless, her smile practiced and wide. And Beatrice, standing entirely too close to her son, was directing the photographer with frantic, imperious hand gestures. No, no, closer from the left. Beatrice was squawking, her heavy jewelry clanking. Make sure you get the chandelier in the background. We want everyone to see the scale of the event. I stepped directly into the photographer's line of sight, effectively ruining the shot. The photographer lowered his camera, looking annoyed, but I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Gabriella. Zoe, Gabriella blinked, her practiced smile faltering instantly. A flash of genuine panic crossed her features. What are you doing up here? I told you, Beatrice arranged the seating. You need to go back down before people start sitting for dinner. You're going to cause a scene. I assure you, Gabriella, I have no intention of sitting down, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the music. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. The absolute, freezing calm in my tone made Matteo visibly flinch. Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer that she didn't bother to hide. Excuse me, Beatrice hissed, leaning in close so only the four of us could hear. I thought we made it perfectly clear. Your presence here is an embarrassment to my family. Matteo has important colleagues here, people of substance. We cannot have the woman who refinishes old tables hovering around the VIP section. Return to your designated area immediately, or I will have security escort you off the premises. I turned my gaze to Beatrice. I looked at her overly tightened face, her rented jewelry, and the absolute hollow arrogance in her eyes. You don't have the authority to remove me from a building I am paying for, Beatrice, I said quietly. Beatrice let out a harsh, barking laugh, looking around as if to share a joke with an invisible audience. Paying for? Oh, please, you bought a few floral arrangements, maybe. Mateo and I handled the heavy lifting for this wedding. We provided the luxury. You're delusional. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply looked back at my cousin. Gabriella was staring at her bouquet, refusing to make eye contact with me, implicitly backing up Beatrice's outrageous lie. The betrayal was complete, absolute, and suffocating. I came up here to tell you something, Gabriella, I said, my voice unwavering. When I attended my cousin's wedding, my seat was in the basement. I was told I didn't count. So I am standing up. I am taking my gift, and I am leaving. Beatrice laughed again, a grating, terrible sound. Oh, the drama. Let her leave, Gabriella. What is she going to take? The crystal gravy boat she bought off a registry? Good riddance. We don't need your cheap little gifts. I slowly lifted the manila envelope, holding it up so the overhead chandelier light caught the thick paper. It's not a gravy boat, Beatrice, I said, my eyes locking onto Gabriella's pale face. Inside this envelope is the deed to a fully paid-off, $1 million Tudor home in the Heights. It was my wedding gift to you both, a house I restored with my own hands. Mateo's head snapped up, his jaw physically dropping open. A house, he stammered, looking from the envelope to me. Zoe, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter what I'm talking about, Mateo, I replied smoothly, because I am not Signan. The transfer documents. I am selling the house on Monday. I shifted my gaze back to my cousin, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Furthermore, Gabriella, there is a second item in this envelope. It is a certified check for $48,500. It is the final payment to the caterer for the food you are about to eat, the alcohol you are about to drink, and the staff who are currently serving it. Gabriella's face drained of all color. Zoe, what? I just canceled the check, I stated simply. The funds have been frozen. You wanted a high society wedding, Beatrice? You wanted to claim you paid for it. Congratulations. The bill is officially yours. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute, a stark vacuum amidst the joyful noise of the surrounding reception. Beatrice's sneer froze on her face, contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. You're lying, Beatrice finally sputtered, her voice losing its haughty polish and cracking into a shrill, desperate register. You can't do that. The contracts are signed. You're just trying to ruin Mateo's day with your pathetic, poor woman dramatics. The contracts are in my name, Beatrice, I corrected her softly. And I have just notified my bank that services will not be rendered to my satisfaction, as I am no longer a guest at this event. Gabriella stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out toward me. Zoe, please, you can't be serious. Mom Beatrice said she handled the venue deposit. She said she was paying for the reception. Did she? I asked, raising a single eyebrow. Tell me, Beatrice, did you show Gabriella the receipts? Or did you just intercept the invoices I've been paying for the last 8 months and take the credit? Before Beatrice could formulate another lie, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. It was Marcus. I opened the message. It contained a single, heavily encrypted PDF file. I tapped the screen, my eyes rapidly scanning the first page. The information was staggering, even worse than I had anticipated. Zoe, stop this right now, Gabriella pleaded, her voice rising in pitch, drawing a few curious glances from nearby guests. You're embarrassing us. Mateo's mother is a wealthy woman. She has investments. If you're going to be this petty over a seating chart, she'll just write a check right now and cover it. Won't you, Beatrice? Gabriella looked at her mother-in-law with desperate, pleading eyes. Beatrice, however, was staring at my phone, her face the color of old parchment. Sweat had broken out on her forehead, ruining her expensive makeup. She dug through her sequined clutch, her hands shaking violently, pulling out a gold-plated credit card. Of course, Beatrice stammered, her voice breathless and frantic. I will handle it. I will go to the manager right now. I don't need your dirty money, Zoe. I wouldn't advise using that card, Beatrice, I said, my eyes glued to the PDF Marcus had sent. According to the deep dive asset check my corporate attorney just ran, that specific account was maxed out 3 months ago. Beatrice froze, the gold card slipping from her trembling fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. "What?" Matteo whispered, looking at his mother as if she were a stranger. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I didn't look up from the screen. I just started reading aloud, my voice clinical and detached. Beatrice Sterling. 2 filed bankruptcies in the last 12 years. Current primary residence, a leased condo not owned, is currently 90 days past due on rent with an active eviction notice filed last Tuesday. Total outstanding credit card debt across 7 different banks exceeds $80,000. Current liquid assets in checking and savings. I paused, looking up to meet Beatrice's terrified, bulging eyes. $412. Gabriella let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. No, that's impossible. She told me she was setting up a trust fund for our future children. She told me she was old money. She's old debt, Gabriella, I said coldly. She hasn't paid for a single floral arrangement, a single appetizer, or a single drop of champagne today. I paid for all of it. And she manipulated you into throwing away the only person who actually cared about you, just so she could pretend to be queen for a day without me standing here to remind her of the truth. "You're a monster," Beatrice suddenly shrieked, lunging forward, her hands curled into claws. Matteo quickly grabbed his mother by the shoulders, pulling her back, his face a mask of shock and disgust. "You hacked my accounts. You're a jealous, vindictive liar." "I'm a businesswoman," I corrected her calmly, slipping the phone back into my purse. "And I know a bad investment when I see one." Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors of the catering office swung open. Mr. Vance, the immaculately dressed venue director, marched out into the foyer. He did not look happy. He was holding a clipboard and looking frantically around the room. His eyes locked onto our group, specifically onto Beatrice, who had been loudly boasting all morning about being the primary benefactor of the event. Mr. Vance marched directly up to Beatrice, entirely ignoring the wedding photographer who was now awkwardly packing up his gear. "Mrs. Sterling," Mr. Vance said, his voice tight, professional, but carrying an unmistakable undertone of panic. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have a critical emergency. The certified check for the final balance of tonight's event has just been flagged by the issuing bank as a stopped payment. The funds are frozen." Beatrice backed away from him, shaking her head frantically. There must be a mistake, a bank error." "There is no error, ma'am," Mr. Vance stated firmly. "The bank was very clear. The account holder personally canceled the draft. Now, as per our contract, the final balance must be cleared before the main dining room doors are opened for the dinner service. I need a new form of payment immediately, Mrs. Sterling. The amount is $48,500. How would you like to handle this?" Beatrice looked at the venue manager, then at Matteo, then at Gabriella. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Only a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. The illusion was completely shattered, the glamorous facade crumbling into dust right in front of our eyes. Gabriella turned to me, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup, ruining her flawless look. The realization of what she had done, of who she had trusted, and what she had thrown away, was finally hitting her with the force of a freight train. "Zoe," Gabriella whispered, her voice breaking, sounding like the 10-year-old girl I used to comfort after nightmares. "Zoe, please, what do I do?" "Zoe," Gabriella whispered, her voice breaking, sounding like the 10-year-old girl I used to comfort after nightmares. "Zoe, please, what do I do?" I looked at my cousin, truly looked at her for the first time that entire day. The haughty, distant bride who had allowed me to be banished to a subterranean storage room was gone. In her place stood a terrified young woman, drowning in a sea of tulle and lace, finally realizing that the magnificent ship she thought she was sailing on was nothing but a painted cardboard prop rapidly taking on water. Before I could answer her, Mr. Vance cleared his throat, his professional patience wearing noticeably thin. The commotion in the foyer had not gone unnoticed. The string quartet inside the ballroom had taken a break, and the heavy mahogany doors had been propped open by curious guests. A crowd was slowly forming around us. I recognized several of the women in the front row of the onlookers. They were Beatrice's so-called country club friends, the wealthy socialites she had been desperately trying to impress, the very people for whom I had been hidden away. "Mrs. Sterling," Mr. Vance repeated, his voice carrying clearly into the sudden, echoing silence of the foyer. He held out a small, black leather folio containing the final invoice. "I need a resolution this instant. If you cannot provide a valid credit card, a cashier's check, or a direct wire transfer for the $48,500, I am legally obligated to instruct my staff to begin breaking down the dining room. The dinner service will not commence." Beatrice's eyes darted frantically around the room like a cornered animal. She saw her friends watching. She saw the whispers starting behind manicured hands. The illusion she had sacrificed my family to build was shattering loudly and publicly. "This is absurd," Beatrice shrieked, pointing a violently trembling finger at me. "She is the one who canceled it. Arrest her. She is trying to sabotage my son's wedding out of sheer, unadulterated jealousy. I demand you honor the original payment." Mr. Vance did not flinch. "The bank has frozen the funds, ma'am. The original payment does not exist. The balance falls to the primary contract holder, which, according to the transferred paperwork you insisted upon signing yesterday to claim the credit for this event, is you." I left my primary checkbook in the bridal suite," Beatrice stammered, her voice dropping an octave, a desperate, hollow lie tumbling from her lips. She took a step backward, trying to retreat toward the elevators. "Matteo, darling, tell them to wait. I will go upstairs and make a call to my broker. This is just a minor liquidity issue." "There is no broker, Beatrice," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, tense air like a silver blade. I turned my phone around, ensuring the screen was bright and visible, though the numbers were too small for the crowd to read. They didn't need Ed to read them. My voice was more than enough. "Your last investment account was liquidated 4 years ago to pay off a civil settlement for credit card fraud. I have the entire legal docket right here." A collective gasp echoed from the gathered crowd. One of Beatrice's close friends, a woman draped in an absurd amount of pearls, actually took a physical step away from her, as if financial ruin were a contagious disease. Shut up, you wretched, dusty little carpenter," Beatrice screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her polished persona. She lunged toward me, her hands reaching out as if to physically claw the phone from my grasp. She never made it. Matteo stepped squarely between us, catching his mother by the wrists. His face, usually so mild and accommodating, was completely transformed. It was pale, rigid, and hardened by a sudden, devastating clarity. "Mom, stop," Matteo commanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of profound grief and absolute fury. "Just stop. Is it true, all of it? The eviction, the debt? Did you lie to Gabriella about paying for all of this?" Beatrice looked up at her son, tears of pure, selfish panic streaming down her face, ruining her heavy mascara. "I did it for you, Matteo. I wanted you to have the best. We belong in this world, not with people who work with their hands. She doesn't understand our pedigree." "We don't have a pedigree," Matteo shouted, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We have nothing. You made me believe we were just temporarily embarrassed. You made me look the other way when you insulted Zoe. You made me complicit in humiliating the only person who actually supported us." He dropped her wrists as if they were burning coals. "I am so incredibly ashamed of you." Beatrice let out a low, pathetic wail, sinking slightly in her expensive, unpaid-for heels. But the climax of the afternoon did not belong to Matteo, and it did not belong to me. It belonged to Gabriella. My cousin stepped forward. She reached up and unpinned the heavy, diamond-encrusted tiara that Beatrice had insisted she wear. A piece Beatrice claimed was a family heirloom, but which my lawyer's document revealed was a cheap rental currently accumulating late fees. Gabriella let the tiara drop to the marble floor with a sharp, definitive clatter. "Mr. Vance," Gabriella said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. "There will be no payment coming from that woman. The reception is officially cancelled." "Gabriella, no," Beatrice gasped, reaching out. "Do not speak to me," Gabriella snapped, turning her blazing eyes upon her mother-in-law. "You poisoned my mind. You preyed on every single one of my insecurities. You convinced me that my own cousin, the woman who worked until her hands bled to put a roof over my head, was someone to be ashamed of. You made me banish her to a basement." Gabriella's voice broke on the last word, a sob tearing from her throat. "You are a fraud, you are cruel, and you are no longer welcome here." Gabriella turned to the stunned crowd of Beatrice's invited guests. "The wedding reception is over," she announced loudly. "There is no food, there is no open bar, you can all go home." Finally, Gabriella turned to me. The heavy silence in the room was absolute. She didn't ask for the house deed. She didn't ask me to fix the catering bill. She simply looked at me, tears streaming freely down her beautiful, ruined face, and whispered, "I am so sorry, Zoe. I am so sorry." I looked at the woman who had just thrown her own dream, wedding into the fire to finally do the right thing. I slowly placed the manila envelope back into my clutch. "Come here, Ella," I said softly, using my childhood nickname for her. She practically collapsed into my arms, sobbing into the shoulder of my emerald gown. I held her tight, rubbing her back, staring coldly over her shoulder at Beatrice, who was now standing completely alone, surrounded by the judging eyes of the society she had destroyed her own family to impress. The trap had been sprung, the truth had been entirely illuminated, and the antagonist had nowhere left to hide. The immediate aftermath of the cancelled reception was a whirlwind of logistics and quiet, painful realizations. Once the grand ballroom had been cleared of Beatrice's bewildered and gossiping guests, I pulled Mr. Vance aside. I did not reinstate the $48,000 check. Instead, I used my corporate card to pay for a significantly scaled-down service. I arranged for the kitchen to box up the majority of the lavish, 5-course meals, and arrange for an immediate courier to deliver them to 3 local women's shelters I frequently supported. Then I asked Mr. Vance to set up a single, small table in the venue's private, sunlit conservatory. Just one table. Not in a basement, but surrounded by blooming orchids and floor-to-ceiling windows. There were only 12 heirs. I invited the 12 people who actually mattered. Mateo's quiet, hardworking aunt who Beatrice had tried to exclude, Gabriella's 3 closest friends from college, and my own small circle of loyal colleagues. Beatrice, of course, was not there. Mateo had personally escorted his weeping, protesting mother out the front doors, and hailed her a taxi, explicitly telling her not to contact him until he was ready. In that quiet conservatory, the healing began. It was a solemn, tearful dinner, completely devoid of the artificial pomp and circumstance Beatrice had demanded. When the plates were cleared, Gabriella and I stepped out onto the attached terrace. The evening air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the suffocating drama of the afternoon. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," Gabriella said, leaning against the stone balustrade, staring out at the darkening gardens. "When I saw you standing in that foyer, holding that envelope, and I realized what you had bought for us, and what I had allowed her to do to you, I felt sick to my stomach, Zoe. I still feel sick." "You broke my heart, Ella," I told her, choosing absolute honesty over comforting platitudes. Sitting in that basement, looking at that plastic table, it was the most profound betrayal I have ever experienced. You allowed a stranger to convince you that my love wasn't polished enough for your new life. "She made me feel so small," Gabriella confessed, her voice thick with regret. "She talked about lineages and pedigrees and social standing until my head spun. I was so terrified of not being good enough for Mateo's family that I threw away my own. I was weak, and I was incredibly stupid." I reached out and gently covered her hand with mine. "You were manipulated, but today, in front of everyone, you chose the truth. You chose me. That took strength. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild this trust, Gabriella, a lot of long conversations, but we will do the work, because we are family. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes again, and pulled me into a fierce, desperate hug. It was the first time all day I felt like I truly had my cousin back. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of Beatrice's actions finalized her ultimate downfall. True to my nature as a businesswoman, I did not leave loose ends. I handed the encrypted PDF file over to Marcus, who used his extensive legal network to ensure justice was fully served. Beatrice's financial house of cards collapsed with spectacular speed. Within 10 days, her eviction was finalized, and she was forced out of her luxury condo. But worse was yet to come. Marcus's deep dive had uncovered a pattern of severe financial misconduct. Beatrice had attempted to take out several high-yield personal loans using Mateo's social security number and forged signatures. When Marcus presented this evidence to the authorities, a formal fraud investigation was launched. Faced with the undeniable proof of her crimes and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Beatrice's social circle evaporated overnight. The country club revoked her membership due to unpaid dues, and her wealthy friends stopped returning her calls. She was utterly, entirely ruined, reduced to living in a weekly motel on the outskirts of the city, awaiting her court date. Mateo, shattered by the extent of his mother's betrayal, fully cooperated with the investigators and cut off all contact with her. 2 months after the wedding that never was, I drove Gabriella and Mateo to the Heights. I pulled my car into the driveway of the beautifully restored Tudor home. The sun was shining, illuminating the gleaming hardwood floors visible through the large bay windows. I put the car in park and turned off the engine. Reaching into the glove compartment, I pulled out the familiar manila envelope. I had held on to it, keeping the deed solely in my name, until I was absolutely certain that the rot of Beatrice's influence had been entirely excised from their lives. "I told you I was going to sell it," I said, looking at the two of them in the rearview mirror. They were holding hands in the backseat, looking tired but genuinely happy. "But I think the market is a bit soft right now. And frankly, I put too much work into sanding those floors to let a stranger walk on them." I handed the envelope back to Gabriella. She took it with trembling hands, pulling out the deed and the attached pen. "It's a foundation," I told them softly, turning around in my seat to look them in the eye. "It's a place to build a real life. No lies, no pretenses, just hard work, honesty, and family." Gabriella uncapped the pen, her tears falling onto the thick paper as she signed her name next to mine, officially claiming her home. The nightmare was over. The truth had won. And as I sat there, watching them walk up the steps to their new front door, the lingering chill of that concrete basement finally, completely faded away, replaced by the W. Arm, quiet piece of absolute vindication.